It does not matter when you salt your water for dried pasta. There's a pervasive belief that you have to salt the water at the beginning before you bring it to a boil. There's also a pervasive belief that you have to salt it after the water is already boiling. I'm gonna prove it to you. Those are both myths, as long as you don't put in way too much salt. How much is too much? Well, that's a trickier question, and we'll get back to that. But put your salt in whenever. As long as the salt goes in before your pasta goes in, you're golden. The dissolved salt will season the noodle from the inside as it cooks and swells up with the water. Now, both the salt early and salt late myths are predicated on real facts. The salt early camp points out that if you wait until right before the pasta goes in, the water might not be as hot as it could be when you dump the noodles in. The newly introduced salt will temporarily lower the temperature in the pot because the salt is cooler. I mean, unless you keep your salt in the oven or something, the salt's gonna be at room temperature. It's cooler than the hot water. Plus, when the salt dissolves in the water, that is an endothermic reaction. It takes heat energy to break apart the sodium and chloride ions. The net temperature in the pot goes down, and it takes the stove a little time to bring it back up again. The salt early folks say you wanna throw your salt in at the very beginning, give everything plenty of time to come up to the highest possible temperature before you drop the pasta. And indeed, hotter water does cook pasta faster and better, to my taste at least. Here's a batch I cooked the whole way at sub-boiling temperatures, about 95 degrees Celsius. This pasta shape is usually done in 10 minutes at a full boil, 100 C, but in the sub-boiling water, it took 15 minutes, not 10, and the surface of the noodles was a little gummy and slimy by the time the inside was al dente. So yeah, I think it's probably true that you want your water boiling well when you drop your pasta in. But is the salt really gonna cool it down that much? A few big pinches into this little boiling pot did not register at all on my consumer grade thermometer here. If I start dumping in the whole salt cellar, I lose a few tenths of a degree, but that's way more salt than you'd ever use. Plus, the temperature bounces right back again after a few seconds. For me to get any noticeable degradation in quality of the finished cooked pasta, I had to turn my heat all the way down, and I had to hold my pasta at 5 whole degrees under the boiling point for the entire duration of cooking. That resulted in a slight difference in texture. Over here, we're talking about a dip of a tiny fraction of a degree that only lasts a few seconds. There's no way that's gonna have a noticeable effect on the food. One other argument the salt early camp makes is that salt water comes to a boil faster than fresh water. Salting at the beginning will save you time. This is technically true. Salt lowers the heat capacity of water, meaning it takes less energy to raise the temperature of the water. But again, this only makes a noticeable difference at completely insane levels of salinity that you'd never cook with. A big pinch into just a little cup of water here made no difference that I could observe with a stopwatch. So that's why I'm saying the salt early rule is a myth. Then there's the salt late rule. Some people warn that if you throw your salt in right at the beginning in still cool water, it won't dissolve as well. And that's true, at least at first. As heat rises, water becomes a better solvent, and the physical agitation of all those bubbles does a good job of stirring the salt around, getting it evenly distributed. And even if the salt isn't evenly dispersed, you're gonna agitate it some more with the pasta. So it's all gonna get mixed up no matter what. Back when I first started cooking on the internet, there was a self-identified professional chef who used to really love coming at me in the comments, and this is back when I still had a bad habit of indulging that kind of stuff. And anyway, this chef just insisted that salt has this really profound effect on the boiling temperature of water for pasta. And I'll never forget what he said. I cited some science indicating that salt doesn't do that much in terms of boil temperature and all of that, and he said, I don't care what a scientist tells me. I can see with my own 2 eyes that when I put the salt in, the water boils harder. I put the salt in and the water goes whoosh. From this, chef deduced that the salt is making the water a lot hotter, and hotter is better. And I kind of felt the guy's frustration, because here's the problem. Your eyes are really good at telling you whether something is happening. They're not as good at telling you why it's happening. This furious whoosh that happens when you throw in the salt, this is not evidence of dissolved salt making the water boil hotter. How do I know? Well, instead of a handful of salt, let's do the same exact thing with a handful of sand. Whoosh! Same deal, and note that the sand is not dissolving like the salt does. We still get that appearance of the water boiling harder. I'm pretty sure this is because both the salt and the sand are facilitating what the scientists call bubble nucleation. You ever notice that when you first put a pot of water on the heat, where the bubbles start forming is around the edge. For a hot water molecule to convert into steam and form a bubble, it has to overcome the atmospheric pressure pushing down on the water's surface, and it has to overcome the intermolecular bonds that hold water molecules together in groups like raindrops. That's called surface tension. It takes much less energy for this molecule to overcome these forces and expand into a gas if there's something on the inside of the pot for bubbles to grow on, what they call nucleation sites. Some impurity in the water or some irregularity in the pot surface. Look at how craggy that steel is under the microscope, and as I turn the heat on, check out the bubbles forming on those crevices. There's some scientific articles about this in the description. One explanation I've read says that those little caves form protective barriers. They shield the baby bubbles from the compressive forces all around them. The crevices may also harbor air pockets that were trapped when we poured in the water. Regardless, it takes way less energy to grow a bubble than it takes to get it going, so they get bigger and bigger, rise to the surface because they're less dense than the water, and pop. In a super smooth container like glass, there aren't many crevices and cracks that can serve as nucleation sites, so the bubbles have trouble forming, and this can result in a phenomenon known as superheating. This is something that happens to me all the time when I'm boiling water in here for coffee. Nice pure water, nice smooth glass, nice even heating from the microwave, no physical disturbances breaking the surface tension. There's nowhere for bubbles to grow, so the water actually gets hotter than its normal boiling point. It superheats. And then eventually you might hear this foom sound coming from the microwave as finally the bubbles explode. Or they could even explode on your hand when you reach in. You gotta be careful. Or maybe, get a kettle. But definitely get your coffee from Trade Coffee, the sponsor of this video. As I have converted to a coffee drinker quite late in life, Trade has grown with me. At first, I would take their quiz online and say, I'm a noob, just send me something good and pre-ground. Now I can tell them that I like very light roasts and some unconventional processing methods, and to this day, they find me new and interesting coffees from top roasters that meet my tastes. The coffee comes right to my door in these compostable bags, super fresh, and holy moly, this Rwandan coffee roasted by Sterling is exactly what I've been looking for. It's acidic, it's fruity, some dark chocolate notes. You give feedback and Trade gets better and better at keeping you in a constant supply of your perfect coffees. You get your first bag for free when you sign up with my link in the description. Free shipping too. Hit my link below, take the quiz, sign up, and get your first bag free. Thank you, Trade. Anyway, that violent reaction in the microwave, I'm pretty sure is just a more dramatic version of what we see happening when we throw salt into already boiling water. We suddenly introduce a ton of craggy surface area into the pot, providing a ton of bubble nucleation sites, and whoosh, teeny little pockets of superheated water in there are given a means of escape. This is not an indication of the water getting hotter, it's just the opposite. This is heat energy leaving the pot, though still not nearly enough to make a meaningful difference in how the pasta cooks. Now that salty chef in the comments pointed out that when salt is dissolved in water, it actually raises the boiling point of the water, which is true. Once the salt is dissolved, it will take a little more energy for water in here to vaporize and escape. Thus, the temperature inside your boiling salt water is greater than it would be in boiling fresh water, and your pasta gets boiled at a slightly higher temperature. Yes, I put my GoPro in a boiling pot, just for a few seconds. It was fine. Salt water does boil hotter than fresh water, but you'd have to put in a lot of salt to raise the temperature even a single degree. Here's a little pot of boiling fresh water, hovering right around 100 C where we'd expect it. Now I'm gonna dump in my entire salt cellar. This whole thing of salt, I'm gonna dump this into this, which is way more salt than anyone would use for pasta. In it goes, and as we'd expect, the temperature dips at first by like half a degree, a minuscule difference for pasta cooking. Give it a minute to rebound, and that gagging amount of salt has raised the boiling point about a degree, a minuscule difference for pasta cooking. Hey, let's put in another full cellar. There we go, and hey, now we're getting somewhere. 104. It's salty enough that crystals are starting to form on the rim. Let's do another cellar. At this point, we've saturated the water. At normal atmospheric pressure, at least, we simply could not dissolve any more salt into this. There's salt at the bottom that's just sitting there. Crystals are hopping out of solution on the side. It's the Dead Sea in here. Probably about 30% salt in the actual dissolved liquid, and the temperature, 107. Based on my experiments, that's enough to make a slight noticeable difference in the texture of the pasta. But you would never use anywhere close to this much salt. How much salt would you use? Well, there's an old adage that pasta water should be as salty as the sea. I even repeated that once in one of my earliest videos here. And I guess I never really thought much about it. Is it true? Seawater varies a lot, but on average it's about 3.5% dissolved salt by weight. So 965 grams of water, 35 grams of salt. Oh, I can already tell this is way more salt than I normally put in. Get that dissolved and bring it to a boil. By the way, this is really salty water and the temperature is still right around 100 C. Salt is irrelevant to temperature in pasta cookery. Boil that pasta for exactly 10 minutes per the package instructions, drain and taste. Yeah, that is way too salty. I wouldn't call it inedible because it's only like half the salinity of seawater. The brine is diluted by all of the dry mass of the pasta. I did the math and it's about as salty as a dill pickle. And I really like dill pickles, but yeah, that is way too salty for pasta, at least to my taste. Maybe if you dressed it in a sauce heavily that was completely unseasoned. Let's see how much salt I usually use. This is about how much I usually eyeball into this pot. It's a couple of big pinches and wow, 5 grams? So if seawater is 3.5% salt, my normal pasta water is like 0.5% salt. Boil that for 10 minutes, drain, and that actually tastes a little under-seasoned, but I suppose my sauces are usually pretty salty, so dress that simply, and yeah, that tastes perfect to me. I like the heterogeneity. The sauce and the noodle complete each other, and you can taste their different salinities interacting with each other as you chew through them. So does this mean we shouldn't season pasta water at all? That's the East Asian way of doing rice, right? Plain, unseasoned, steamed rice complemented by heavily seasoned accompaniments. I love it. Everybody loves it. So let's try pasta that way. 10 minutes in pure fresh water, drain, give it a salty sauce to balance it out, and that's not working for me. It's too heterogeneous, the contrast too extreme. The pasta itself just tastes like gummy nothing. Now, do I feel that way simply because I have lived my whole life eating pasta that was boiled in salty water and that's just what I'm used to? I have no idea, and I don't really care. You like what you like, right? But I don't like being wrong, and I was wrong when I said years ago that pasta water should be as salty as the sea. However, I understand why that advice has persisted for generations. I think it does work in practice. Let me show you. I tried tasting both of those salted pasta waters. If you just dip your finger in really fast, that little film of water cools off very rapidly in the air and you don't scald yourself. You can just lick and have a taste. Honestly, I couldn't tell much of a difference between the 3.5% seawater solution and my normal 0.5% pasta water solution. Maybe if I tasted them side by side, but in the moment, they both just tasted unpleasantly, excessively salty. I think the seawater adage persists simply because that's the closest analog that most of us have in our lived experience. We simply don't get salt solutions anywhere near that strong in our mouths that often. And we simply haven't developed a really fine perceptual instrument for telling the difference between salt solutions in this extreme high range. At least I haven't. I think what salty as the sea means in practice is add salt until the water tastes bad to you. We are evolved to be repulsed by seawater because if we drink a lot of it, we die. Just get the water a little saltier than tastes good to you. Because remember, the pasta will only end up being about half as salty as the water that you boiled it in. From there, you can adjust seasoning to taste in the pan with the sauce. It's a system that's worked for generations, just as coffee plus boiling water has worked. Don't forget to get your first bag from Trade free with my link in the description. And hey, a tiny pinch of salt in coffee is good too.